Environment variables let us define parameters that affect the way our shell works, and the way programs run in some cases. In this video, we'll look at some environment variables for the Bash shell, the default shell in Ubuntu. So let's open up our terminal window so we can get access to our Bash shell now. Now we're talking about environment variables, and there are two types of environment variables. There are local variables, and we can display these by running the set command. Now here it's not only variables that are displayed, but local functions as well. So these shell-defined functions that we see here, so these are all functions. But if we scroll up, we should get to some of the variables if our window lets us scroll back far enough. Maybe not. There are quite a few functions defined locally, so we can't really see the local variables. To get around this, let's set a local variable. So to set a variable, we can just type in some variable name, say my variable equals, let's say test, for our test variable. So now if I run set and do a grep, so I would do a search for my variable, you see that this is found inside of our set results. So the same results that I outputted up here. So we find it, so it is set, and it is a local variable. Now to display global variables, so global environment variables, we can run env, or in some cases print env. These are alias to the same function, so let's just run env. And here are all of our global environment variables. Now there's some important ones like path, which should be up here somewhere. Let's see. It's much easier if you grep for it. Here we go, the path. So this, if we run a program or type in a program name, this is where our shell looks to find that program. And we get something where our current working directory, our default editor. So there's lots of settings that affect the way our program runs or displays information. So these are all the global environment variables. Now, if we'd like to make that my variable that I just set to go from local to global, we can just do an export. So export, type in the local variable name, so my variable. Now if I type in env, we should be able to find my variable as we see here. So my variable equals test is now a global variable. Now if I'd like to remove it, I can do unset, type in the variable name, my variable. And if I'd like to output the variable, I can do echo, put a $ and the variable name. Now this will be a problem because I just unset it on the line before, so it's not set to anything. But if I echo something I know is there, like path, it outputs the value of path. So this is what our path variable is set to. Now, if we set a custom variable, like my variable, we don't want to have to set them every time we open up a terminal window. Because if I define a variable, say my variable equals test, and now I'll do set, grep my variable, I don't really need the quotes, my variable, we find it. But if I close the terminal window, open it up again, and do set, grep my variable, it's not there. So we need some way of setting them that they're persistent. And we can do that by editing them in the appropriate config files. Now the main one we have is the ets profile. So this file here, if we output the contents, is our global or our kind of system-wide environment variables. So we can set them in the ets profile, or if we want to set environment variables that only get set for our current user, we can edit them in our local profile. So we have the .profile in our home directory. So if I look at the hidden files, so .profile is in our home folder, and it's a hidden file, and this is where we can set certain environment variables. So if I open this up, I'll use Vim to open it up, .profile. You can see here, this is where we set our files. And I have one set here already to set the default editor for the command line for the shell to be Vim. But I can easily change this to be something else. Let's set it to the other editor, Nano. So this will run the Nano editor when the shell needs a default text editor. So if I run something like cron tab -e to edit the cron tab, it opens it up in Vim. So this is Vim. And if I quit out, and since I changed it in .profile, I need to log in again for those changes to take effect. Or I could just set it on the command line. If I just say editor equals nano and do cron tab -e, it opens it up in nano. And just to see it again, editor equals Vim, cron tab -e. This time it's opened up in Vim. So if I make changes to our .profile to change environment variables locally, I need to log out and log back in. So I need to click here, go down, log out, and when I log back in, the environment variables will have changed. So that login runs the .profile or opens it up and applies any changes that were made. So let's go here. If we do vim.profile, so this .profile only gets run when we log in. Now there's some other things it does by default. It loads this .bashrc file, but bashrc is for things like aliases to functions, or any user-defined functions go in bashrc, but we're not going to go into it in this video. But if you're setting environment variables, like in this case editor, or you're making adjustments to your path, you should do in your .profile. Now if you look here, what this is doing, it's looking to see if this home bin folder exists, and if it does, then add it to the path. Now if I look in my home directory, I could do make-dir bin. It already exists, so if I look at my path, so if I echo path, you'll see here my home directory with the bin extension. This part of the path was set in the .profile. And that'll conclude this introduction to environment variables in Ubuntu.